Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen. Welcome to The Real Story. I am really excited, you guys, that it is the first edition of The Real Story. And the reason why I'm interjecting these into our usual lineup of incredible expert guests is because some stories need more time. They need more attention. They need to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what happened, because some of these cases are so bizarre. There's either no one to interview, they're old enough that maybe everybody has passed away, or they're just so oddball and so strange, it's really hard to find an expert guest to come on about them. So I can't wait to delve into our first case. And that is the strange, the weird and the strangeness of Missing 411. But not only the missing people of Missing 411, but a specific thread and trail that we're going to go down today. Now, for those who are not familiar with these bizarre disappearances, hang on, we're going to get there. Let's go.
Kaylee Cuoco and Sam Claflin star in the MGM Plus original series, Vanished. When the man Alice loves disappears on a train to the south of France, every romantic memory becomes evidence. Every intimate detail, a potential threat. She thought she knew everything about him, but she may not even know his real name. New episode Sunday on MGM Plus. Finding the truth is a dangerous affair.
There are places in North America where people vanish without warning. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no tracks leading away. Search teams comb the area. Dogs lose the scent. Weather doesn't cooperate, but sometimes it doesn't need to. The trail simply stops. Tonight, on Supernatural Circumstances, The Real Story, we're stepping carefully into one of the most controversial threads woven through David Paulides' Missing 411 research, a thread he himself treats cautiously, but one that keeps resurfacing in historical accounts, indigenous stories, and search and rescue reports. Stories of something large, something intelligent, something that doesn't want to be seen. Tonight's question isn't, do giants exist? It's, why do so many disappearances share the same strange details over centuries, across continents? And why do some of those details quietly point upward in size? Before we talk about giants, we need to talk about a man who never set out to find them. David Paulides is a former law enforcement officer who spent years working cases involving fraud and criminal investigations. He's not a paranormal researcher by training, and by his own admission, he was once openly skeptical of unexplained phenomenon. His path toward Missing 411 began unexpectedly after receiving repeated requests to investigate cases involving Bigfoot sightings near areas where people had gone missing. Paulides didn't believe in Bigfoot, but he did believe in data. So, instead of chasing legends, he began requesting missing persons records, particularly from U.S. national parks. That's when the problem started. Paulides discovered that no centralized database exists for missing persons in national parks. Records were incomplete, delayed, or outright unavailable. Some cases had been quietly closed with no resolution. Others were never publicly discussed at all. As he compiled cases himself, patterns began to emerge. Not theories, not beliefs, patterns. These patterns would eventually become known as the missing 411, a label Paulides uses not to explain disappearances, but to categorize cases that share highly unusual, repeatable features. And it's important to say this clearly. Missing 411 is not a single cause. It's not a monster. It's not a diagnosis. It's a red flag. A way of saying something about this doesn't fit. So, what happens when those red flags point repeatedly towards the same kinds of locations, the same kinds of victims, and the same eerie silences? On June 14th, 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, one of the most heavily forested and frequently visited parks in the United States. Dennis was hiking with his family near Spence Field. At one point, the children decided to play a harmless game, hiding and jumping out to scare adults. Dennis hid behind a bush. And then, he was gone. Not wandered off, not gradually separated, gone, within minutes. His father began searching immediately. Park rangers were alerted. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations in U.S. park history at the time. Over 1,400 people participated. Green berets were brought in. Tracking dogs were deployed. And almost immediately, things went wrong. The dogs couldn't maintain a scent. Weather shifted rapidly. Rain erased potential tracks. But the most disturbing detail came from a nearby witness. A man reported seeing something large, moving upright, carrying what appeared to be a child, moving quickly through the brush, far faster than any human should have been able to manage in that terrain. The report was logged, then quietly sidelined. Despite weeks of searching, no physical trace of Dennis Martin was ever found. No clothing, no remains, no evidence of animal predation. Paulides highlights this case not because of one strange detail, but because of how many missing 411 markers it contains. A young child, a national park, a sudden disappearance, a loss of scent, rapid weather change, a witness describing a large upright figure, and a total absence of remains. Dennis Martin was never found, and the park has never provided a definitive explanation. Paulides does not claim Dennis Martin was taken by a giant, make no mistake. What he does point out, quietly and carefully, is that when cases like this are removed from databases, dismissed as animal attacks without evidence or stripped of witness testimony, we lose the ability to see patterns clearly. And when you lay those patterns alongside warnings from local people, historical accounts, and modern searcher experiences, the picture becomes a lot harder to ignore. Long before national parks, before search and rescue teams, before missing persons databases, the indigenous nations across North America told stories of giant beings that lived beyond the edges of human settlements. The name change depends on the culture. The Sitka, the stone giants, the Bukwas, or the Sasquatch-like giants, even in Coast Salish traditions. What's important here is not sensationalism, it's consistency, as we mentioned before. Across unrelated cultures, separated by thousands of miles, these beings are described with striking similarities. Again, we're talking about patterns. Taller than any man, extremely strong, covered in hair or animal skins, living in caves, forests, or mountainous regions, and, sometimes, reported to take people, especially children. These stories weren't told as myths for entertainment. They were warnings. Don't go there. Don't whistle at night. Don't wander alone. In many missing 411 cases, children report something eerily similar after surviving. It carried me. It was tall. It told me not to be afraid. Often said calmly, without drama, as if stating a fact. One of the most unsettling aspects of this topic is how much historical documentation actually exists, quietly buried in old newspapers. In the 1800s and the early 1900s, American and Canadian papers regularly reported discoveries that today would be dismissed outright. Oversized skeletal remains, giant human bones, unearthed during construction, 8-foot-tall skeletons found in burial mounds. These articles weren't written as a joke. They were written as news. Smithsonian correspondence from the late 19th century references unusual finds, many of which allegedly disappeared into collections that just no longer acknowledge them. Again, this isn't proof of giants, but it is proof that something was being found and then quietly stopped being talked about. Paulides points out that in missing 411 cases, bones are rarely recovered, even when predators, terrain, and time should have left something behind. It's the absence of that stands out, among other things. Some of the most chilling missing 411 accounts involve not the missing, but the people looking for them. Experienced trackers report feeling watched, hearing heavy bipedal footsteps pacing them, rocks thrown from unseen locations, sudden, overwhelming dread with no obvious cause. In multiple cases, searchers have described the same thing. It felt like something just wanted us gone. These aren't experienced or inexperienced hikers. These are law enforcement, sometimes laymen, military-trained trackers, indigenous searchers who know the land intimately. Can be a myriad of different people. Paulides highlights cases where search efforts are abruptly called off, not due to weather, but unspoken consensus. No explanation, just, we're done here. Perhaps the most haunting cases are the ones where children are found alive because they talk. A toddler disappears. Hours or days later, they're found miles away, cold, hungry, but alive. When asked how they got there, answers include, well, a bear helped me. I slept in a cave. The man with the hair carried me. In one case, a child says he was watched over by a grandmother figure, but search dogs refused to approach the area where he was found. Now, Paulides doesn't interpret these statements for us. He lets them sit. Because children don't have the vocabulary to lie convincingly about things they've never seen. They describe what they've experienced in the only language that they have. So, what is it? Are these giants? Are they misidentified animals? Are they unknown hominids? Psychological phenomenon? Coincidence, layered on coincidence? These are all things we have to look at as researchers. Paulides never gives a final answer, and neither will I. But here's what can be said with confidence. People are disappearing under highly unusual circumstances. Patterns persist across time, across geography. Witness testimony, especially from children and professionals, is being ignored. And warnings of the locals align disturbingly well with modern cases. Now, whether the explanation is biological, environmental, or something that we haven't named yet, the wilderness is not empty and never was. So, what do we take away from this as investigators? Well, one of the things that we have to begin to understand and we have to begin to look at is the consistency in people's reports. And the one thing that I've noticed throughout my over 20 years of being in parapsychology is that the majority of people are explaining what they've seen. They're explaining as much about the truth as they believe it to be. Now, what they perceive might not be accurate, but it is usually what they perceive. And the percentage of people and witnesses who are afraid to come forward that are just simply lying is, well, next to zero. Now, another narrative that appears throughout many of these cases, another thread, if you will, is the idea of these people being transported somewhere. Now, the question becomes, well, by what? Are we talking about Sasquatch? Are we talking about portals? Are we talking about time slips? Or are we just talking about a horrendous accident in the wilderness? That's where things get really tricky. And as investigators, we have to keep an open mind as we start to delve into any sort of case. And of course, being respectful that these are real people with real families that have disappeared. Let's talk about another case. On this day, in the summer of 1938, the Baleharts family had come to Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park to get away from city heat and bad news on the radio. Well, we all know what that's like today. The Great Depression was easing, war clouds were gathering in Europe, and here in the high country, none of that mattered. 10-year-old Alfred was the smallest in a large family, trailing behind older cousins, splashing in the cold water of the creek that fed the roaring Big Thompson. It was the kind of family trip where the danger you worry about is a skinned knee, a bee sting, or an argument over who gets the last sandwich. But sometime that day, in the noise of the water and the laughter, Alfred disappeared. Not wandered off, not sulked away. He was simply there, and then he wasn't. Decades later, his name would surface in a body of work that, well, some people say points to the disturbing pattern in the wilderness. Exactly what we've been talking about. David Paulides' Missing 411. Cases where people seem to vanish in ways that strain belief, as we've observed. Now, this family had adults nearby. They were responsible. They weren't expecting any trouble in daylight. Alfred was playing near the water with his cousins and older kids. He was seen near the water, then was assumed to just have walked back with the other children. Only later did the family realize the horrifying discovery that Alfred wasn't with them. Now, this was a short time window. It wasn't like hours had gone by and nobody had seen him. There was only a few minutes between the last sighting and then the realization he was gone. The initial assumption was there had been a terrible accident. He'd slipped and fallen, sunk in the river. Maybe an undertow caught him. Something happened. He was swept away. There was immediate panic from the family. The park rangers were called immediately. Initial search was focused on the water, thinking that maybe Alfred drowned. The early expectation was that this would be a quick and tragic recovery, and not a mystery at all. The rangers, the local volunteers, the park staff were combing the area. If a child had swept into fast water, he should be found along a predictable path, especially if the search starts quickly. And boy, did the search start fast. Some accounts were mentioning tracking difficulties or lack of a clear sign. The point for this narrative, however, is that searchers didn't find what they expected when a child drowns. Now, a group of hikers much higher up in the park reported seeing something very interesting. And let me tell you the importance in any case of whether it be paranormal phenomenon or just a regular investigation, the importance of finding yourself some eyewitnesses. And in this case, this may have been one of the turning points. The hikers, who were much higher up in the park, reported seeing a small boy on a ledge watching them. Later, they thought maybe it could have been Alfred. The location is steep, rugged, very difficult for a 10-year-old to reach, alone, in that time available. Remember, the time slot was very, very small. And by the time the searchers reached that area, the boy that was sighted is gone. Now, this is the key missing 411 pattern. Very strange distance, very strange elevation gain, and difficult terrain in a very short time frame. If this sighting was indeed Alfred, then the official story that he just slipped beneath the water and was carried away starts to wobble. It asks us to picture something else, a boy who somehow leaves the creek without leaving a clear trail and appears hours later in a place that grown men would struggle to reach. Now, decades after the fact, David Paulides documents Alfred's case as one of the most puzzling disappearances in North American parks and wilderness areas. There was many recurring features here. Again, young children, vulnerable individuals going missing, sudden disappearance with a very short time window, proximity to water, difficult or improbable locations linked to later sightings or recoveries, and searches that simply fail to find evidence or remains. So, why does Alfred stand out? Maybe they just tragically couldn't find him. Well, the early date in the 1930s tells us that this pattern is not something that's modern. This isn't something that's just been pulled out of the air. The reported ledge sighting at high elevation was too far, too fast, and too hard for a small child. Lack of closure, let's talk about that. As far as the record shows, Alfred is never definitively found. So, Paulides doesn't claim to solve any of these cases, not even Alfred's. He catalogs patterns and raises questions. And for Alfred, the central question becomes this. If he didn't drown in the creek, where did he go? And how did he travel so far, so fast? Now, looking at Alfred's story through the missing 411 lens doesn't magically explain it. What it does is put his name beside hundreds of others, forming a shadow map of places where the world just doesn't behave the way we expect. It's not proof of anything paranormal. It's a chorus of cases whispering, something is wrong here. Now, on this show, we talk a lot about consciousness. We talk a lot about things like interdimensions and crazy ability to maneuver the environment to maybe even to our will. Now, what's interesting about these cases is that there is a slight crossover here, and we've talked on the show before about people experiencing what they believe may have even been a portal, a strange light that they can't explain, things passing in and out of it. I myself have talked about this on the show. I've repeated my own story a number of times. And this begins to weave itself into the missing 411 cases as well. Now, many people have proposed various theories. Unusual predators or human predators, for that matter. There's a lot of weird people in the woods, you guys. Secret installations, UFOs, even non-human entities. But natural and artificial portals, localized anomalies where space, time, or reality just simply behave differently, can't be taken off the table. Now, in later missing 411 work, including UFO-focused material, ideas of advancing technology and possible doorways, well, they start to appear. Though Paulides himself tends to be cautious with overtly paranormal labels. So, even he's cautious and taking a step back. But let's talk about this. What are the elements that actually invite this language into the story? Well, extremely short time window to vanish from a relatively contained area. No obvious physical trail, as if the person was just plucked from one area and deposited in another. The remote elevated ledge sighting, in Alfred's case, which is quite frankly out of reach for a child. From a portal theory perspective, this looks like what they call a vanishing point, near the creek and an unexpected reappearance in a physically improbable location. So, let's talk about consciousness. Some traditions view certain landscapes as what they refer to as thin places, where the boundary between worlds or states of consciousness is just fragile. In that view, the portal isn't just a sci-fi device, it's a liminal zone where a person's awareness and physical location can simply slip. Now, if such zones exist, children might be especially vulnerable and perceptive because they're simply more open, more in the moment, and less anchored to routine. And we see this with psi experiments all the time, where children, often just less hindered by the busyness of the world and stress and states of expectation, actually do a lot better on psi tests in the lab than are, adults like us who are just bogged down with life. So what does that mean? Remember, this isn't an accusation that supernatural forces literally snatched Alfred out of the blue. River accidents and search limitations are still very plausible explanations for what happened. But there's something else. Many researchers and rangers argue that Alfred, they just most likely drowned, and that any later sighting could have been mistaken identification, just another child far away on a rock ledge. Early 20th century search and rescue lacked the technology, the training, the coordination that we expect today. Missed evidence and miscommunication, it's extremely plausible. A lot of the critics of the missing 411 argue that once you start looking for patterns, that you can stitch many unrelated tragedies into a single narrative. They point out that by focusing on the strangest elements, you might be downplaying mundane risks, terrain, weather, human error. And let's face it, the wilderness in the US, in Canada, overseas, there's nothing like it. And for those who think, Bigfoot should have been found by now, or these strange animal reportings, they're just misidentifications. There can't be any more unknown animals out there or strange things. Well, take a hike in the Alberta woods and see how far you get. Even with all of this and the skepticism, Alfred's case doesn't feel neat and clean. The emotional truth for many listeners, a watched child in a noisy but controlled setting, had vanished and was never found. And that's the problem. That absence invites questions that just have to go beyond river currents. As storytellers and researchers and parapsychology investigators, we have to live in that tension. On one side, there's a grieving family who deserved better answers that they got in 1938. On the other, there's our modern fascination with portals, UFOs, Bigfoot, and hidden forces in the woods. If we're not careful, we can turn a real boy into a metaphor and forget that he had a favorite toy, a laugh, and a life that mattered. So Alfred's case really it's an early marker. His case sits near the beginning of the timeline that Paulides and others map out in relation to these strange occurrences. It shows that whatever we think missing 411 is, pattern or pareidolia, it's not a purely modern phenomenon. If Alfred's disappearance is just an accident, then missing 411 is partly a project of storytelling, grouping tragedies and overlaying mystery. But if Alfred's disappearance reflects a genuine anomaly, then the pattern is telling us something that we do not yet understand about the wilderness, the reality, or both. So what exactly is going on? Now, we all know that there's an overlap in recent reportings of things like Sasquatch, that portals have been seen, according to eyewitnesses, in relationship to these sightings. Are they related in these cases? Well, you begin to wonder when you start to look at what exactly has been going on. And I highly encourage everybody to watch David Paulides' documentaries on the missing 411. They're available almost everywhere. And I highly recommend taking a look at even more of these cases. We've talked about 2 here, but let me tell you, when they start to add up and you begin to realize that it's not even about just missing children, but skilled hunters, skilled military personnel that are camping in the woods, that appear one place that they shouldn't be, disappearing from another, with no memory or recollection of where they had been, you start to put some pieces together and realize that there's a thread that runs through these that you simply just can't ignore. There's something going on. Now, we've covered this on supernatural circumstances in a few different ways, including the Alaskan Triangle. We've talked about that. We've talked about the triangle in Kentucky. where many times these things seem to be occurring. Now, even here in Alberta, there's been sightings by myself and many others of strange light anomalies that I can't tell you what they are. I don't know what they are. Right down to bizarre creatures that have been seen near them, or strange readings on our equipment, electromagnetic fields that are fluctuating up and down where there's just no power. There's no power lines. There's nothing. There's nothing that should be out there. There's not even a running underground stream. So what does this mean? What is going on in our universe? I tell you, it's bizarre, and it deserves the attention and questions that we're giving it. So when we say Alfred's name now, it's mostly in the context of mystery. He has become just one of the little ones in the missing 411 books, a data point in a dark pattern that stretches across maps and decades. But somewhere out there, in family stories and in the quiet places of our national parks, he and many others are still people who went on a trip with their families, with their friends, and just never came home. Maybe one day, someone will hike a forgotten ridge and notice a scrap of cloth, a small bone, some final proof that these people never left the world at all. Maybe all that happened was a terrible accident and a failed search. Or maybe Alfred's story is, like many others, one more hint that our map of reality is still missing some crucial symbols. The places where here and elsewhere touch. Until we know, all we can do is remember him, listen carefully to the patterns, and tread a little more carefully at the edges of the wild. Well, thank you guys for joining me for the first episode of The Real Story. I hope you enjoyed it. This phenomenon baffles me and has baffled me for a long time. There's not many things in the world anymore that really make me question what's going on in terms of paranormal phenomenon. You know, we turn on the TV and we hear cases and whatnot, and many of the phenomenon is somewhat repeatable and predictable. And this is one of those situations where it simply is not. I mean, there's patterns within these cases, and I don't think we are any closer to answers than when these cases first started being documented. I think one of the reasons why this hits home for me, because I live in Alberta, I live very close to very deep woods and very extensive terrain and accounts of bizarre creatures and just some bizarre disappearances as well as some crazy cases. Like we've talked before about the Swift Runner Wendigo case and the multiple cases of Wendigo that have been reported up here in Alberta. You can't help but hear what's going on with a case like this and look at the woods the same way. You just can't. And it's something that I've taken into account as I explore various aspects of Alberta, of Canada, and even down, of course, into the United States. We just don't know what's out there. And it's so easy to get comfortable. You know, I remember so distinctly, and I've talked about this encounter on the show before, going out just south of Alberta, and some friends and we saw what I can only describe as a portal. It showed up as this bright light that we could not explain. There was no lights around anywhere else. It was so vivid white, and we saw something, and I don't proclaim to know what it was. We saw something step out in front of that light, stop and look at us, and when the light disappeared, so did it. And I proclaim no answers as to what that was. I don't think any of us do. And it stands, when I think about these cases, it stands as a testimony to maybe what might be happening on some of these bizarre disappearances, as horrendous and as tragic as they are. I mean, no explanation makes them better. No explanation is going to give these cases less pain than what the families experienced, what they're still experiencing, still looking for their missing loved ones. But it is something to acknowledge and examine. And I hope today that we did that and it got you guys thinking. I want you guys to get online and start Googling, start researching, start looking, and just explore this stuff, because that's what makes this a worthwhile thing for myself, just to know that there are other people out there who are enthusiastic about finding answers. And even if it brings up 50 more questions every time we go looking, as I'm sure you guys have now, 50 more questions since you've been listening to this. So thank you guys so much for joining me for this. This has been so wonderful to be able to share these cases with you, and there's going to be more upcoming throughout the year of supernatural circumstances here that is going to be coming up, and it's always just such a pleasure to be able to interact with everybody. So I would love to hear some of your theories. Come join us on the Supernatural Circumstances Facebook community if you want. I'd love to hear some of your theories on all of this, because they're always really intelligent and really interesting. So there's that. So thank you for joining me on this eerie expedition, my dear listeners. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker, Paranormal Research and Teachings, and The 20th Plane. This podcast is a part of the Curious Cast podcast network. You can find out more about me, Morgan Knudsen, and book me for live appearances at entityseeker.ca. You can also email the show at supernaturalcircumstances.com.
Welcome to Survivor 50.
February 25th on Global.
We chose you to represent 25 years of the greatest adventure on television.
It's the biggest season ever.
The twist is going to open up Pandora's box.
Now I see Zach Brown on Survivor.
Welcome to Survivor, Mr. Beast.
Feels a little like a high school reunion meets a massacre.
Survivor 50th season, Wednesday, February 25th on Global. Stream on Stack TV.